Hello and welcome to this Dot Connector videocast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, there's not been a lot of good news in Britain in the last few weeks with terrorist attacks and of course the beyond horrific fire at the Grenfell Tower in Kensington in London. And after researching a global conspiracy, because that's what it is, for the enslavement of humanity and the transformation of human society. These horrific events have great significance in terms of that conspiracy. They can be seen on one level as the incident in and of itself, or they can be connected together and shown to be part of a pattern that is pushing the world and pushing people in a very clear and obvious direction. I've been warning about the creation, step by step by step, of what I call the Hunger Games society. And there are many, many elements of it. And as I've traveled around the world, particularly since the summer of 2016, to country after country, Australia, New Zealand, America, all across Europe, every place I've gone through a checklist of happenings, a checklist of desires, like a wish list of this global conspiracy, this Hunger Games society. And every time, tick, tick, tick. Some more in some countries than others, but always the list is there to be seen. And this Hunger Games society is a structure which has the less than 1% at the top of the pyramid, and everyone else virtually at the bottom in dependency and poverty. And in the strata of this Hunger Games pyramid between the two is planned to be, and my goodness me, is it happening or what? A vicious, merciless police state, well, military police state in the end, imposing the will of the less than 1% on everyone else and holding that status quo of control by the very few over the very many. Now, there are many ways that this structure is being brought about. Obviously, there are still a lot of people who are not in the less than 1%, who are still doing okay financially. They still have a nice home. They still have a few bob in the bank. And I'm sure while they look at the unspeakable nightmare of Grenfell Tower, they will, like most people, have great compassion for those who suffered and those who continue to suffer. But there will still be well, it doesn't directly affect me. But when I talk about this Hunger Games society, it does involve them, because apart from the less than 1%, everyone else is planned to be at the bottom of the pyramid, struggling to survive. And so they have to part those people that are doing okay at the moment from their money, from their security. And this is planned to be done through the banking system and crashes in the banking system, and what people call the middle class are being more and more systematically targeted by authority and by the less than 1%, because they're designed to be at the bottom of the pyramid with everyone else. So, in short, we're all in this together, even if it doesn't seem like it, looking on now. And in direct relevance to Grenfell Tower, the plan for this Hunger Games society is very much like the Hunger Games movies. They plan to have centers, which in the movies were called the Capitol, centers for the rich and apparently powerful, where they live in high-tech luxury, state of the art. And they're protected in these enclaves of privilege, excuse me, by the military police state. Everyone else who is currently in those areas designated for this Capitol privilege are planned to be removed. And this is what the so-called gentrification of many major cities, not just in Britain, worldwide, is all about. They have a policy which is clearly happening, like I say, not just in Britain, but around the world, of manipulating economics, manipulating circumstances that cause people living in these designated capitals to be removed, and the land then cleared for luxury accommodation. And so you had, with Grenfell Tower, money spent on a so-called upgrade, which was nothing to do with improving the facilities of the residents. They don't want to improve the facilities and get people to want even more to stay. They want rid of them as far away as possible, away from these designated centres of capital privilege. And so the money was spent on cladding the outside for no other reason than to make it look nicer in the way that it appeared to passers-by, etc., for the benefit of those in that area that lived in the expensive houses. And this cladding was not even inflammable. They put cladding purely for aesthetics that, as we saw in this horror, burned like a matchstick. And now they've found that this has been done in many other blocks in Britain. Putting people's lives at such blatant risk just to make a building look nicer from the outside for the benefit of the rich in the area. In one sentence, the Hunger Games society is described, and the attitudes of it, and the callous disregard for anyone who's not in the privileged few. And so, as a result of public outrage, it's now been said that the survivors of the fire will be housed in the area in another block. But that was not what was happening before the outrage. It was not what was really planned. People who survived that unimaginable nightmare were being offered places in the north of England, in Manchester, in Preston, and told that if they didn't accept that, they were making themselves homeless by their own decision, and thus were no longer the responsibility of the local authority. This is the callousness that's behind the Hunger Games society and the gentrification of cities, the removing of people they think are lowlife. And the fact they're, so they say now, going to be housed locally is only because of public outrage. Those not in the capitals of the Hunger Games society are being designated to live in what they literally call in their own documents human settlement zones. These are highly densely populated centres with what they call micro apartments. And I mean micro, tiny living space, which involves things like furniture having to come out the wall. They're so small. And this is one thing on that list, as I've travelled around the world, that has come up almost everywhere. The emergence of these micro apartments in densely populated blocks. And the other side of this destruction of the ability of people outside the less than 1% to function in areas they want them out of is to target local business, to target small business. Because in the Hunger Games society, there is not supposed to be any small business or even medium-sized business. Eventually, the entirety of the economy is planned to be controlled by gigantic corporations, which of course go on getting bigger and bigger and bigger all the time. And so all this tidal wave of regulation, of red tape, of added costs, of decisions being made by local councils to make it far more difficult for a smaller business to survive. All of this is planned. They want the end of small business. And again, what are most small business people? They call them the middle classes, most of them. So the so-called middle classes and the so-called working classes are all being targeted to the same end. And it comes under two United Nations agendas, Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. Agenda 21 was introduced at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And Agenda 2030, the updated version, was agreed by the UN General Assembly in 2015. Now, here's some headlines of what Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 are seeking to do. And by the way, these are agendas for the transformation of global society, which gentrification is very much a part, as I'll come to, that are orchestrated globally through the UN, but instigated locally. You look up your local council or your local state or where you are in the world, and you'll invariably see that they have signed up to Agenda 21 and they're supporting Agenda 2030. And because this global agenda is being introduced locally, they are hiding the global coordination of it. Oh no, it's just a local council initiative. Oh really? The same initiative with that council and that council and that council and that country. This is how the thing's being systematically hidden. So here, from their own documents, are some of the headlines of what these agendas want to do. This is Agenda 21, first of all. They want an end to national sovereignty. Now, when you look at these different agendas and documents, and then you compare them with the wish lists of the global social engineering organizations, the lists virtually are identical. And one that comes up again and again is the end to national sovereignty. This is what the European Union is all about. It's there to take national sovereignty away as this Hunger Games society unfolds. Now, here is one of the great ironies that so-called progressives who are up in arms, understandably, about what has happened with Grenfell Tower and about austerity programs, which are all part of Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, they vehemently support, most of them anyway, they go out on marches demanding that these crazy old people that voted to come out of the European Union have their decision overturned and we stay in. Yes, we stay in a European Union which is run by dark suit, unelected bureaucrats that virtually no one can name, and is there to systematically take away national sovereignty in line with Agenda 21, 2030. And they also support basically open border immigration. And one of the key reasons that the migrant crisis has been systematically created, and it was, I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, is to bring lots of different cultures together to dilute the indigenous culture for a very simple reason. It's all psychological in the end. It's all a mind game. One of the greatest forces of resistance to the end of national sovereignty is a sense of national identity. I mean, I'm not into nationalism and national identity. I just see everything as consciousness, but that's just me. But large numbers of people with a sense of national identity will resist having sovereignty taken away in its entirety because of that sense of national identity. What the systematically created migrant crisis is about, on one level anyway, is ending that sense of national identity. So the resistance to the end of sovereignty, national sovereignty, will be massively diluted. Something that's happening, by the way. Here you go. State planning, this is Agenda 21. State planning and management of all land resources, ecosystems, deserts, forests, mountains, oceans and fresh water, agriculture, rural development, biotechnology, and ensuring equity, equal slavery. What that means is the centralization of power over every aspect of human life. Something I've been warning about. They want a world government to oversee this, and we're moving towards that all the time. The European Union is such like the so-called superstates are the next strata down in this Hunger Games structure from the world government that they want to introduce. The state to define the role of business and financial resources. That's the centralization of power over all business and all finance. Abolition of private property. Apparently it's not sustainable, but that won't apply to the less than 1%. The end of private property means you're taking away security from people and you're making them dependent on outside forces then for where they live. Restructuring the family unit. This is on the wish list of all these social engineering organizations. They want an end to the family unit because they want the state to take over control of the upbringing of children so they can be programmed with the state's mentality from the earliest possible age. This is why parental power is over their children is being eroded and eroded and eroded and handed to schools and handed to bureaucrats. This is why around the world, not least in Britain, you have this phenomenal number of children taken for spurious reasons from loving parents by social services who are on financial incentives to do it. All these things are connected. You have to connect the dots before you see the picture. People told what their job will be. We're talking about centralized fascist dictatorships here, or a dictatorship globally in the end. Major restrictions on movement. So we're seeing moves towards that, making it more and more difficult to travel. And now we come to this part of the agenda that is specific to situations like Grenfell Tower. These are the creation of human settlement zones, high density micro apartments which allow 24/7 surveillance of everything that you do. And they're being brought about by not upkeeping and repairing property in areas you want people out of, and forcing them into the areas where you want to densely locate them. Also, like I say, with increasing prices to make it impossible for people to live in certain areas. And then once you are forced out of the area you live, well, you go and live where you're designated to live, and more these mega cities for the what are now the middle and working classes start to be created, and more the land is cleared in the designated capitals for the rich and powerful. Now, Agenda 2030, like I say, voted into being at the UN General Assembly in 2015. What this is using to bring about the same end is the technique of tell them what you want to do in a way that they couldn't possibly argue with. So on the list of goals of Agenda 2030 is no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities, they're the human settlement zones, and communities, responsible consumption, production, climate action, come to that in a second, protecting life below water and life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships to achieve these ends. Now, of course, that is a load of meaningless frickin' platitudes. What that actually means to so-called achieve that, they don't really want to achieve that, they're just telling you they do, is the centralization of power over all those areas of human life on a global level. Because they'll say we can't achieve these laudable ends without the global power to do it. And people have asked me, and I understand it many times, you're saying that this whole human-caused climate change is a giant hoax. Yeah. Well, why would they do that? I'll tell you why. I've just told you why. Because Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 are being justified, massively justified, by needing to change society to protect from climate change caused, they say, by human activity, but not. And so we have another irony now. Not only are progressives who protest about Grenfell Tower and protest about austerity supporting a European Union that is fundamentally part of the Hunger Games society structure that is creating the austerity and creating the situation where the Grenfell Towers can happen. But these progressives are also vehemently saying everything must change to protect the world from climate disaster, which is a fundamental manufactured excuse to introduce Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. And this cognitive dissonance of opposing one thing but supporting another that's creating the thing you oppose is through pure, undiluted ignorance with a hell of a lot of arrogance thrown in. People say, "Oh, we don't read the Daily Mail, we don't watch Fox News." Yeah, okay. Where do you get your information from then? Oh, we get it from The Guardian and MSNBC and the New York Times. Yeah. Think of a postage stamp. The media organizations that you condemn are there on the postage stamp. The ones you read and watch are there on the same postage stamp. They're just a different, slightly differently emphasized expression of the same information source. And thus, you have basically the same news packaged in a different way. What people need to do is get off the frickin' postage stamp and start looking at information outside the mainstream media that is available, and then they might have a chance of knowing what's going on. And stop campaigning for and promoting organizations and ends that are part of the very creation of that which you say you don't like. And if you have a target population, and it's a vast population because you're talking about virtually everyone who's not in the tiny few, then what you have to do to control that population is to divide and rule it. You have to set it at war with itself. So it is so focused on fighting between itself that people don't look up in different factions, different religions, different income brackets. different political beliefs. They don't all look up and say, hold on, the string's attached to me and the string's attached to you. There's only one bloke holding them. Yes, exactly. Human society is being played off against each other all the time. Migrants and non-migrants, this colour against that colour, this religion against that religion, this income bracket against this income bracket, this political belief system against this political belief system. And I look on, my head shakes anymore, it'll probably fall off at some point. And when you look at what happened immediately after the disaster at Grenfell Tower, you had people of every religion, of every colour, probably of almost every background, turning up, asking what they could do to help, bringing clothes, bringing food, saying, what can I do? Did they worry about what religion they followed or what the person they were helping followed? Or what their belief system is or what their colour is? No. And it's amazing, isn't it? And tragic in a way that it takes disasters, human tragedies, to clear away the frickin' crap, to let us see what really matters. And it ain't religion, and it ain't colour, and it ain't creed, and it ain't money. It's basic humanity. And we urgently, desperately need to come together on that basis. Because the human race is being divided and ruled into global enslavement on a scale that would even make George Orwell wince. We need to stop looking to politicians to make things happen. These political parties are connected to the same system that is driving the Hunger Games society, though most are so ignorant they don't even know it. And people show in times of tragedy the true nature of what we could be. But you see it again and again. You see this humanity coming out. Then the charity record comes out and we go through this process. And then, once it's out of the headlines, it's out of sight and it's out of mind. And everything goes back to how it was before. We've got to make a stand at some point. And we've got to come together and put down all these ridiculous, ludicrous things that are there to divide us. And start sorting this out together. In mutual support, irrespective of background, creed, whatever. Because if we don't, this Hunger Games society will unfold, because it is unfolding now. And those with a lot of money in the bank, but not part of this elite, we now have something called bail-ins. Bail-ins are when a bank crashes, they're not bailed out by taxpayers via governments collectively. But the bail-in means they can go direct to the accounts of customers of that bank and just take their money. That's how fragile it all is. That's how fragile people who think they're okay really are to this evil that is manipulating human society. And that's the point. One of the hardest things to get across is the scale of pure, undiluted evil that is behind all this. And I'll give you an example. While the world in general was looking at Grenfell Tower in horror and outrage and deep compassion, the less than 1% would have been laughing and thought it was all a joke. I've tracked these people for nearly 30 years worldwide. I know what their mentality is, and I know the scale of evil that we're dealing with. We have to come together and set aside differences, because if we don't, we'll be divided and ruled into the nightmare I've just described.